I remember really clearly going to the march for the first time and having a sense of visibility that I don't normally have. Like, I'm not someone who people tend to, like the cis het world tends to view as in any way on the LGBT spectrum because of probably their sort of narrow understanding of what LGBT looks like. And it was like the first time that I'd actually kind of had that level of visibility that I think in any other context would have made me feel vulnerable. But within the context of it being like so many other people at the same time, it was a way of being visible that felt safe and that I felt like proud of myself as an LGBT person. I was always like, oh, well, why do I need pride? I've got my like queer friends and I don't see how it's relevant to me. And it wasn't until I went that I was kind of like, no, it's so different being in an environment of just LGBT people. I hadn't realized how much, there's so many things that you don't have to explain that are just understood when you're around like loads of LGBT people that you just don't have in the normal world. And I think going back to that normal world after being in Pride and not having that, I felt it a lot more keenly. Obviously, it's something that sort of alienation is something, or that feeling of being different is something that I'd always had, but I hadn't really realized it until I was in an environment where everyone else was similar to me and kind of there was that understanding and community that I felt a part of. I was involved just as an attendee for a number of years. And then my partner was involved in Exeter Pride and I joined as a trustee. I went from being a trustee to being secretary, and then from being secretary to deputy chair, and now I am acting chair. So it's quite a long way to come from someone who didn't really see how pride was relevant to them at all, or why it was important, to someone who is now the acting chair of the organisation. There's been a number of standout memories. Obviously, the first Pride that I organised was like I felt, immensely proud of myself, what I'd helped to achieve. But I think it was the drag king competition and myself at like being able to host it in drag. It was just so joyous and was part of the drag community, which doesn't often to get to be front and center, and tends to be people who are much more marginalized than a lot of cis drag queens are. So, and for myself being non-binary, being able to kind of inhabit that masculine part, I was hosting as a Victorian gentleman called Sir Limps-a-Lot because I was using a walking stick, and and the experience of the other drag kings as well, and how positive it was for them, and how much like the audience liked them. It just made me feel like a sense of belonging and being able to sort of express that part of myself. And I think that other drag kings felt the same.
How do you think prides have changed over the years?
But I'm not sure really. I think because I had such limited involvement in Exeter Pride, I know from talking to other people who've been involved in the project for longer, I can see like how Pride's had a sort of an acceleration in terms of its size since it started. Like when it started, it was just in the Phoenix and I think in the library. And then, it went into Northern Hay Gardens. It got really, really big. There was, a huge stage and Just Stone came. And then I think that was kind of what people thought that Exeter Pride would be. That was like the template of what it would be like. I think one of the nice things about the Rainbow Fair that people said to us is that it was small enough that it had a lot more of a community feel to it. Obviously, it's great that Pride, when it's in Northern Hay Gardens, it attracts so many people, but it doesn't always just attract the LGBTQ population. I think people come along because it's also a nice day out with music, which I don't know if that is exactly what I feel like Exeter Pride or any pride should be. I think it should be a bit more for the community rather than just like the wider population of Exeter. I think it's risked becoming more entertainment than a form of protest. There's things like, Jasmine Gardosi's spoken word set that they did at Pride last year that I felt was, really political. But I think it's a little bit of a socially acceptable form of the queer community rather than a more radical form of the queer community. I think we still need pride, especially in Exeter where there's like no gay bars or clubs. I think that pride is needed differently by different people in terms of like the LGB part of the queer community. We have been able to acquire quite a lot of the rights that we fought for, like same-sex marriage, adopting children, and just a much greater social acceptance. Where I feel like the trans community, for example, is sort of like where the LGB community was maybe like 20 years ago in terms of the discrimination and lack of access to healthcare and the political and societal discrimination that they're facing. That's like an area of inequality that really needs challenging. There's people within the queer community, particularly disabled people, who are having a really rough time of it, like being disabled myself. Like the 12 years since the Tories have taken control have been awful. There's been cuts to disability related benefits, and it's been far, far more than anything to do with my sexuality or gender has been the hardest thing for me to deal with. And I think when we say we want to support LGBT people, we don't want just to support LGBT people in things to do with them being LGBT, but in terms for them being a person with other intersectional issues going on.